Welcome back to Veteran Voices, episode number 8. I like to call it episode 9, just to throw Craig off a little bit. But I'm here with Army veteran Lance Zedric, publisher and author, author of The Last Rubicon, about the Alamo Scouts of World War II. First, let's learn a little bit about yourself. How much time did you do in the Army?
Okay, I did 4 years in Army intelligence, and I was a 2-time member of the United States All-Army Track and Field Team. And I worked a mission with the 525th MI Brigade out of Fort Bragg during Desert Storm, and with the 501st Military Intelligence Brigade out of Seoul, Korea.
Oh, nice. Mm-hmm. And I always had to tell jokes about other branches because I'm a Navy veteran.
Absolutely.
And I noticed that you were on the track team, and it's probably because the Army guys like to run from things, right?
Yeah.
I always pick on every single branch, although I love them all the same. So
I have a joke about the Navy, but we can't say it on air. I'll tell you later.
I'll let you hold off with that one. So looking into this, I started looking at this Alamo Scouts, which is very, very intriguing to me. I'm more of a Vietnam era person. I like the history of the Vietnam area, and I do like to hear some of the stuff in World War II, but a lot of it's the standard same thing over and over. What intrigued me about the stuff you talk about in the Alamo Scouts was a special group that only lasted 2 years in World War II. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Absolutely. First of all, to give you a little background of how I found the Alamo Scouts, and I think that's really the story here. Sure. And I mentioned to you earlier how they found me. I was at a gun show at Fort Bragg in 1992, getting ready to transition back to the civilian world to graduate school. And I noticed this patch, the Alamo Scouts patch. This particular patch had a price tag of $500 on it. And I had collected patches since I was a kid, and that's really what got me interested in the military history. So I said, $500 plus a few expletives. And I said to the guy who was a friend of mine who was a Green Beret, I said, what do you know about these guys? And he said, not a damn thing. And he says, I just know they were in the Pacific with the 6th Army. I said, okay. Well, didn't give it much thought. And then I had another friend who was a dealer in militaria, and I asked him about the Alamo Scouts. So what do you know about the Scouts? And he says, I just know their patch is $500 and the rarest in the Army. And I said, oh, okay. Well, I wish I could have that patch. Well, anyway, fast forward a little bit. I got out of the Army, returned to Macomb for graduate school, and quite frankly, I needed a topic for my thesis, and I wasn't about to rewrite the history of the French Revolution because I know nothing about it to begin with.
Right.
And I wanted something to be done with quickly. So immediately I thought of this Alamo Scouts. I thought of this patch.
Yep.
And I thought, okay, let's take a visit to the college library. And I did, and there was like 2 references to them in a footnote.
Oh, man.
I said, hey, this is getting good.
Self-challenge, right?
Absolutely. The professors will never find this. Well, it just so happens I called the chief of military history, and he said, never heard of them. I said, wow. I thought, well, what now? And he says, hold on a second. I have a roster of associations, and I'll check it. And he says, I have something for you. And he gave me the name of this Colonel Robert Sumner with a big baritone voice and intimidating as all get out. And I still remember making that first call, and he had heard it before, people seeking patches and promising to deliver the world, to write a book on the Alamo Scouts and all this and that. Well, I was just too dumb to quit. I just didn't know better. And I kept bothering him. And sure. Finally, he said, young man, this was near Christmas of 1992. He says, Merry Christmas. I'm going to send you an early Christmas present. So he sent me a roster with about 60 names on it. And he said, the only proviso is that you do not give any of the numbers on this to anyone else. Because the patch hunters are after us and so on. And well, I began calling these numbers, and the scouts had been classified. Their reports had been classified up and through 1983.
Wow.
And this was 92, and there were still some that were unclassified, and they had come about 68 reports.
Wow.
And I just kept learning more and more, and every day it was like I would go to my mailbox, and men were sending me these things and photographs, and we had about 20 photographs to start with. Now I have well over 1,500 photographs.
That's phenomenal. That's awesome.
Just that we've accumulated over the years, and
Sure.
there was a Navy element to it, working with PT boats, and it has really taken on a life of its own and continued to grow. And now, although all the scouts are gone, we continue to find new information, and that's what I do kind of as an avocation.
So now I've got one quick question before we
Yes.
get too far off the beaten path. How long did it take you to scrounge up your money to get your patch?
Well,
Because that's a story in itself, I'm sure.
it is. In 1993, I went to Golden, Colorado. I was invited to one of their reunions, the Alamo Scouts Association reunions. And I had written my thesis, and I presented them a copy of it, and gave the story of what motivated me to begin searching on the Scouts. And a man named John Geiger, whose patch this is, came up to me and whispered, he says, "Don't tell any of the other Scouts," but he says, "I have a patch for you."
Oh, wow.
To
That's
give
awesome.
you. And
That's awesome.
it was, and I have 4 now.
And you cherish each one, don't you?
Oh, yes. And the other guys, don't tell any of the other Scouts. 3%. Yeah. Well, the patch is valued at $3,500 right now.
So what got you motivated to actually go down the path and keep continuing this specific group?
Well,
Was it the challenge of not having all the information available to you that you had to do more research to drive you? Or was it just because of what they've done?
both, actually.
Yeah.
My particular personality is if I stick my finger in a hole in a screen, I'm going to waller it out. And as long as I kept finding information, I just didn't stop. So I kept going and going. And during my thesis process, my professors, when I was defending my thesis, they said, "We have one question. How are you going to get this published?" So basically, I said, "Well, I'm already at that. I've been querying publishers, and it got accepted by a number of publishers, but we want you to rewrite it in a more popular vein."
Oh, wow.
So I did, and the result is actually this book,
Okay.
Silent Warriors of World War II.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
And it has morphed into other opportunities. And in 2013, I wrote a book called Silent No More, The Alamo Scouts in Their Own Words, which is 716-page oral history.
Oh, wow.
Of,
pretty cool.
Of a lot of my research that is not included in here from many of the other scouts that I've found since that time.
Right.
So it's really kind of a neat undertaking. But to get back to your original question, one of the motivations was I was close to my grandfather. All of a sudden, I had 30 or 40 of them.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that happening.
And they treated me like a grandson. And for many of them, they had never told their story. One man told me, he said, "At the end of the war, we were told to go home, shut up, and not say a word." He said, and I maintained that position until 1992 or 1995 when the book came out.
That's amazing. That's just amazing. People are still...
Well,
But
like I said, it found me.
And if I'm correct, reading a little bit of the book, were these men were handpicked, weren't they?
Absolutely, and that's one of the unique characteristics about this group. Not since the Civil War had men elected their own teams or their own team leaders. So what would happen at the divisional level at the 6th Army, there would be a letter going out saying, "Hey, we are looking for men for a dangerous mission for volunteers only." They would be brought in, about 100 of them or so, and they would be interviewed. The commander might have 20 items on a tray sitting in front of him. He wouldn't mention the items. And he would say, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to join this unit? And they wouldn't even tell him the name. Well, I want to kill Japanese. Okay, well, they were eliminated.
Right.
This was a raider and reconnaissance unit that relied on silence and stealth. And matter of fact, they're considered the first long-range surveillance unit, or LRSU, or LRP unit. So they were designed to go behind the lines and be the eyes and ears of an army, but to have the training to perform commando raids and special types of missions in a 6 to 7 man format.
Yeah, to say, when I read about it a little bit, it looked like the max size was like 7 men.
Yes.
Was on average the max size.
And usually it consisted of a junior officer, a lieutenant, and 5 or 6 enlisted men. And they wore no rank. They basically were on first name basis, but the command responsibility actually rested with the lieutenant. So, you're talking 23-year-old men, basically going up to 500 miles behind enemy lines and doing rescue missions, reconnaissance missions, a long-range surveillance, setting up radio stations. And later in the war, they had more of actually a civil affairs function. They were manning 10,000-man guerrilla units in northern Luzon in the Philippines.
Oh, wow.
And these are 23 to 25-year-old men. So back to your original focus of the selection. These men were selected based on their ability to, number one, be quiet. Number two, their observation skills. At the end of that interview, they would walk to the door and the commanding officer might say, turn around, name every item you saw on there, and he'd have it covered up. And people who happened to excel at that were American Indians. At that time, called it Indians, but Native Americans today, from many tribes. They had exceptional visual memory.
Wow. That'd be a good test, though, really.
Oh, it was. And if you didn't cut the mustard, that's just to get into the training. And they were all brought together in a class. Another unique function of their training was that first night after a physical, they would be put in a large tent, and there would be games, checkers, chess, cards, all these opportunities for men to show if they were loudmouths and bullies and not team players. And they were actually being surveilled. And there would be ringers in there. And any man who was out for himself or who was loud and obnoxious, they were gone the next morning.
Right. So it was a pretty good vetting process for them.
Wonderful. And I think that really is the essence of why they were so successful ultimately.
And we talked a little bit about the name Alamo Scouts. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure.
And how that came about?
When General Walter Kruger, Lieutenant General at the time, was the head of the 3rd Army in San Antonio, Texas, well, the Alamo. That's where the Alamo is from. So when he was given command of 6th Army and sent overseas as a 62-year-old commander, which happens to be my age, by the way. So I often think of that. A 62-year-old man was put in charge of an army. It was an incredible testament to his insight, and he was one of the most educated generals in the Army, although he did not have a college degree.
Oh, wow.
He had graduated from the Naval War College. He had been in flight training early on in the infancy of military flight, and just he was a veteran of the Spanish-American War, had served in the Philippines. So
he had some area knowledge.
Yes, he certainly did, and that area knowledge was really key to him being placed as the head of 6th Army by MacArthur over in the Southwest Pacific.
Wow.
And the other element there is that MacArthur, being somewhat of a glory hound, appreciated Kruger because Kruger would hardly say anything. He really didn't care who got the credit.
Right.
As long as the mission got done.
Right.
And that fit right in with MacArthur. You know what? Let me take all the
just get these missions done for me. We're good to go, right?
And Eichelberger, I believe, was related to MacArthur, and he had a little bit more, not trouble, but a little more debate with Eichelberger. Right. And so that's how the name Alamo Scouts, because of the Alamo Force, a code name for 6th Army in New Guinea, to keep operational control away from General Sir Thomas Blamey, the Australian Ground Forces commander. So really it was just a paper shuffle. And then the unit was named the 6th Army Special Reconnaissance Unit, shortened to Alamo Scouts.
Nice. And then I also read a little bit about, and we talked about this a little bit ago as well, the missions that when you first started, it was like, what, 68 missions, and we're at 110 now that are known?
Yes.
So they did quite a bit of things over there. Some things they probably still can't talk about, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And that's been my mission, really, is trying to cull through diaries and reading between the lines. And it's really been a tightrope, because you want to add to their legacy. However, you have to be responsible historically. So as a rule, I had to have at least two separate sources, to qualify something as a mission. In the military, the U.S. Army was very slow to change their incorrect figure. But finally,
I think it's a governmental issue, I think is what it is.
Yes, finally, after all these years, they've kind of taken on the figure that I've arrived at, because one element that really wasn't included before were PT boat reports. Now, they had like 3 or 4 PT boats identified when I first began doing the research. I've since identified 84 PT boats that supported the Scouts, and I know there are more.
Yeah.
It's just the record keeping. If there was not action, per se, they might not note it in their records, but I do have vague reports saying picked up Scout team. Well, it coincides with diary entries and with Scout reports. And
putting the piece of the puzzle together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we have a friend of ours that was a PT sailor, I guess you would say, in the Vietnam area. So he'll probably appreciate talking about
with the Brown Navy.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So talking about some of the things in the mission they did a lot of things behind the lines, obviously, reconnaissance-wise. The other one, we noticed that in the Philippines, they were able to liberate 513 prisoners of war as one instance.
Yes, and I think what happens, like with any human being, you evolve. As you attain skills and experience, your mission evolves, your abilities evolve. So the Scouts started out in New Guinea with your typical mission lasting about 3 days. So they would go in either by PT boat, or they might walk in from the northern New Guinea, but they were working on offshore islands to doing pre-invasion reconnaissance. They would go in by rubber boat, dropped off by PT boat. And they would be in and out. Well, as the Allies moved north and west along the New Guinea coast, and then up into the Philippines, the support they received from the natives increased, because you're working with an occupied group of people who are open to helping you.
Sure.
So all of a sudden, instead of being supplied in a triple canopy jungle, they're being supplied and assisted by the Filipino people.
Right, by the locals, yeah.
So the mission actually expanded in duration and breadth. And many of the guys said they only took 1 day's worth of food with them on a mission once they got into the Philippines, because they were supported so much and so well by the Filipino people, because the Japanese are, quite frankly, very brutal. So to your original point is that in New Guinea, they were operating from certain islands with the help of the Netherlands East Indies Intelligence Service. So they were working with NEFIS and other entities, recovering displaced civilians, recovering down Allied airmen, doing what they could. And they first got their true, I guess, earned their wings, so to speak, is a mission at a place called Cape Orensbari, where they went in and went 30 miles behind enemy lines in the dark overnight and liberated 66 Dutch and Javanese prisoners from the Japanese, killed 18 people in about 25 minutes with absolutely no losses, got exfilled out by foot.
Yeah. And that's what another amazing thing I noticed too is all these missions, there was no loss per se. There was injuries.
Correct.
But no actual loss of manpower.
Absolutely.
Throughout all the missions that they've done, which is phenomenal. Even with today's technology, we're expecting to see losses.
And I think that's a testament to their training.
Oh, absolutely.
To their ability to conceal it, to their teamwork. And here's the biggie. I think this, when you get right down to it, is that they were utilized for what they were trained for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look in Vietnam and other eras where certain special forces units were used or misused, when you go back to World War II and you had Darby's Rangers being used as conventional military forces at Anzio and other places, and they were virtually decimated.
Yeah.
Kruger saw that, hey, I'm not going to use these guys as traditional infantry because a 6 or 7 man infantry team's not going to do a whole lot.
Right.
Yeah. So the credit really goes to Frederick Bradshaw, the first director of training, for the emphasis that he placed on doing the mission that you were trained for and that you were assembled for. And I think that was really essential to their success. Merrill's Marauders is another example of a 2,000-man unit being grossly misused in Burma, and they suffered horrendous casualties.
Oh man, it just amazes me. Just now I started getting into the book, and now I almost can't seem to put it down. I want to see what happens next. It talks about the Dove mission,
sure,
things like that's where I heard about the PT boats, things of that sort. And then the other thing we were looking at is the people that were there. I guess you could say the guys who were serving there and their tenacity to not give up. I remember reading where they actually would dress as civilians, rice workers, and go into a rice hut or whatever you want to call it, and they did their reconnaissance from that location.
That's correct, and that occurred at Cabanatuan, and that was in central Luzon in late January of 1945, when the Allies learned that the Japanese previously had killed a large number of American prisoners at Palawan. They had just incinerated them in a dugout with gasoline.
Wow.
And a couple prisoners had escaped and got back to the command and said what was happening. So the Japanese were increasingly feeling pressured. So Kruger said, once they landed on Luzon on January 9th of 45, and they were making their way through the Central Plain, the fear was the Japanese would execute everyone at Cabanatuan.
Ambush them back, yeah.
Yes. So a plan was quickly devised. Along with 121 Rangers, they had a reinforced company, and the scouts would do the recon. Then they would go in separate ways, separate routes.
Right.
So they went in, and the scouts did the recon, and basically
surprise.
and they launched an attack, and it resulted in 513 prisoners being rescued. It was the raid electrified the nation, and led the next couple days later to the rescue at Santo Tomas and Los Baños, and then just one after another, these rescues began to occur, and it really, I think it inspired not only the troops that, hey, we're getting these beleaguered, battered bastards of Bataan.
Right.
They've been through for 3 years. They've been prisoners, and we're able to rescue them. And I've spoken with many of the POWs who were rescued, and some of them weighed 80 pounds.
That's amazing.
And they, to their dying breath, they said, we owe our lives, our second lives, to the Rangers and the Alamo Scouts and to a company of Filipino guerrillas.
And then the other thing, I was going back to some of the beginnings too. I read where Kruger was not very happy with the intel he was receiving from the previous commands that were, or the groups that he was given to gather his information from, and that was another reason for this group of the 7-man cruise.
Yes, with all due respect, it was the Navy they were having a problem with, and
I knew he was going to come up with something there. We had to get a fact checker on that one.
That fact seems to check out. That's what I'm just telling you. Because I trust everything he said so far, by the way. He's not using any notes or anything. It's all true.
Well, actually, during the reconnaissance of Gazmata in October of 1943 with 6th Army, and it was like a composite group of Army and Navy and Marine scouts. They were doing a recon for this Gazmata operation, and well, everything kind of got messed up, and the PT boats weren't there to pick up the guys when they were supposed to, and they didn't have enough food and almost starved to death, and it was just a snafu all around. Well, when the men did get back, Kruger wanted debriefed. Well, this particular man for the Army element was brought on a PT boat and pretty much sequestered there.
Oh, geez.
And he says, I got to get back and report to Kruger. They said, no, we'll take you anywhere you want to go, just whatever. And the Navy was siphoning what information they could. And then finally, he literally jumped ship and got back to Kruger. And Kruger was so angry, he said, to hell with this, I'm going to form my own intelligence unit. Right. So that was the impetus, really. Yeah. And I think it had been in his mind, of course, because, Darby's Rangers and the 1st Special Service Force, the Devil's Brigade by another name,
right,
had been formed. And I think he wanted his own unit.
Somebody he could trust, I think.
Absolutely.
Would be a big thing. I mean, especially the decisions he had to make.
Well, in World War II, as I'm sure you're aware, is that the inter-service rivalry. If you had a different patch or a different uniform, even if we're on the same side, why am I going to share my intel with you? Because it'll make me look bad. Right. Special Forces, the concept was very elitist at that time, and conventional military officers were like, hey, you know what? No, I want to keep my assets and my information to myself because knowledge is power.
Right. Yeah.
So there are a lot of different elements in the unsuccessful or almost disastrous attack at Kiska in the Aleutians in 1943, a bombing where we bombed like crazy and almost killed our own men, and bad intel and just a smattering of things that contributed.
Things didn't gel together the way they should. Sure. Yeah. So let's close up here with the Alamo Scouts. Do you have any more information on Alamo Scouts that people might want to know?
Absolutely. We continue to promote the history of the Alamo Scouts through the Alamo Scouts Historical Foundation, which is a nonprofit 501c3 entity. You can visit our website at www.alamoscouts.org and read all about it and what we do, and plenty of photos on there. And I put things on Facebook, and always looking for that one little extra tidbit of information.
Right.
And we continue to promote Army excellence through the establishment of memorials and such. We've established memorials at the Army Special Operations Museum, at the Airborne Museum at Fort Bragg, even the Special Operations Missions Training Center was named after Frederick Bradshaw, the first director of training. So the Green Berets and Special Ops people from all over the world train there. And it is really kind of just a neat outgrowth of this patch.
Right. And one last thing about the Alamo Scouts that I was educated upon is that now the Special Force group from the Philippines calls their Special Force the Ranger Scout Regiment. I believe that's what they call them.
Absolutely.
It's kind of an honor to those guys.
Well, one of the Scout team leaders was Rafael Alito, one of 4 major generals. Well, actually, he was a lieutenant general, And he was with the Alamo Scouts, and then he left after World War II and later became the Minister of National Defense and an ambassador for the Philippines. And he took on that name in honor of the Scouts.
That's pretty good. So what else do you have for us here that you'd like to talk to us about?
Okay, well, now that I have a bully pulpit, I would like to show this book here. It's full canon by Carl Cannon and myself, written in September of 2020 during COVID. And I want to put a plug in for Carl. I haven't talked to him in a while because he's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This man is a retired Army veteran. He works with children like no one else. And if anybody exemplifies the characteristics and the core values of leadership and integrity, it's this guy. I cannot say enough. And this is his story. I just chronicled it. So if you get a chance, it's on Amazon, hardcover, it's on audiobook.
Can you tease something in it for us? Can you give us a little bit of his story? Something that people might find in there interesting about Carl Cannon if they know him?
Boy, he bench pressed over 500 pounds. Anybody ever seen his arms, they know that.
That's amazing.
Carl's just, he's just an amazing individual, and he's the kind of person that everybody wants to know.
Yeah.
And you know, how can you fault anyone who helps kids and who helps veterans and gives and gives and gives and takes very little?
That's awesome.
How hard was it to write that book during the coronavirus pandemic?
Intense.
So
we got on the phone and we just talked about this and that and the other thing. And going back quickly to 2005, I was telling you off camera that Carl and I used to work out together.
So you also bench 500?
No, near 4, but
okay, all right, okay.
I was going to say 495 in Army talk.
But I learned about Carl, and I couldn't find out what was it about him to make him do all this. And one day we're on the elliptical, and he's sweating like crazy. And finally I said, Carl, why are you? I just can't find the hook for this book. And he told me a story that opens the book about the death of an inmate and how it impacted him. That was it. Knew it right away. And we'd had a little separation for a while. I mean, just because of things going on. And his mother passed away, and he called me, and we were talking about that. We said, we got to do this book. And then, boom, the rest just occurred, just fell naturally in line. There's lots of military stuff in here, and as well as the stuff he does around here.
Is there lots of military stuff you couldn't put in there?
A few things, believe it or not. A few
There's
things.
always a few things you can't put in something, especially in the military.
Well, great job, guys.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on Veteran Voices. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.